1980 began with disco, still lingering on the radio, but by the end of the year, music had entered a completely different era. British rock, punk, disco, Motown, and emerging pop all competed for the spotlight, creating a year of remarkable contrasts and unexpected hits. I wanna rock with you all night. 12 songs reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, and almost none sounded alike. With the music industry searching for an identity beyond disco, listeners heard everything from rockabilly and art rock to funk, soundtrack ballads, and dance music. Each hit represented a different vision of where popular music could go next. This is the story of 1980 month by month, following the Billboard Hot 100 as each song reached the top. January 1980. Rock With You, Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson didn't just start the decade on top. He announced that the 1980s were going to sound different, and he did it while the charts were still catching their breath from the disco backlash of the year before. Rock With You had actually first reached #1 at the very end of December 1979, but it owned January outright, fending off a novelty hit about a pina colada and a comeback record from a disco-era duo, just to prove it wasn't a fluke. The song came from Off the Wall, the album that turned Jackson from a former child star and Jackson 5 lead singer into a solo force nobody could categorize. Producer Quincy Jones and songwriter Rod Temperton built something smoother than disco and warmer than funk, and Jackson's falling in love vocal made it feel effortless. He was 21 years old and already reshaping what pop radio wanted to sound like. What made January different from the disco-heavy playlists of 1979 was restraint. Rock With You glides instead of pounding, and that shift in feel was a preview of the entire decade to come. Close your eyes, let that rhythm get in. Jackson wasn't chasing the dance floor anymore. He was inventing a new lane between disco, funk, and pop that radio hadn't fully had a name for yet. He would spend the next few years quietly building toward Thriller, but the seeds were already visible here. The falsetto control, the rhythmic precision, the sense that every second of the record was intentional. February 1980, Crazy Little Thing Called Love, Queen. Nobody expected Freddie Mercury to write a rockabilly song. Queen had spent the 1970s building a reputation on operatic ambition, 6-minute epics, and studio perfectionism, so when Crazy Little Thing Called Love showed up sounding like a stripped-down Elvis Presley tribute, it caught even longtime fans off guard. Mercury reportedly wrote it in about 10 minutes in a bathtub, and that looseness is exactly what made it work. The song became Queen's first ever #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, a genuine milestone for a band that had already been one of rock's biggest acts for years without cracking the very top of the American chart. It broke through in the last week of February and kept climbing from there, proving that Queen's audience would follow them anywhere, from bombastic rock opera to bare-bones rock and roll. What made February such a turning point was the contrast it created. American listeners were used to hearing Queen as grandiose and theatrical. Here was a song that sounded like it belonged on a jukebox in 1957, and radio embraced it completely. It reflected a broader trend at the start of the decade, rock acts experimenting with genre rather than staying locked into one identity. Mercury would go on to prove this was no accident. Later in 1980, Queen would return to #1 with a song that sounded like nothing else on the chart, built on a bass line instead of a guitar riff, showing just how far their range actually went. March 1980, Another Brick in the Wall, Part 2, Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd was not a singles band. That was the whole point of their career, built on sprawling concept albums meant to be heard front to back. So when Another Brick in the Wall, Part 2, became a genuine pop radio smash, and their first and only number one, it stunned the industry as much as it stunned the band. The song came from The Wall, Roger Waters' bleak concept album about isolation, trauma, and the dehumanizing effects of institutions, especially schools. The children's choir chanting "We Don't Need No Education" turned an art rock meditation into an anthem that felt subversive enough for teenagers and catchy enough for top 40 radio simultaneously. It was banned by some school boards and beloved by the students inside them. It took over in the final week of March, riding straight into April on the strength of that instantly recognizable groove. It proved that audiences at the dawn of the decade weren't only chasing polished pop. They were also willing to sit with something darker and stranger if it hit hard enough, so long as the beat was undeniable. Pink Floyd would never return to number one, and in some ways, they didn't need to. This one song became one of the most recognizable rock records of the era, still instantly identifiable from its opening bass line decades later. April 1980, Call Me, Blondie. Blondie had already crossed over from CBGB's punk scene into disco pop territory with Heart of Glass, but Call Me pushed them somewhere even bigger. Written with Italian disco producer Giorgio Moroder for the film American Gigolo, the song fused Debbie Harry's cool, detached vocal delivery with a pulsing cinematic production that felt utterly modern. It became one of the biggest hits of the entire year, spending 6 weeks at number one, tying for the longest reign of any song in 1980. That run began in the second half of April and carried all the way through May, making it the true song of early summer and the moment Blondie went from New York scene darlings to a genuinely massive mainstream act. Call Me mattered because it blurred lines that mainstream radio hadn't fully accepted yet. A punk-rooted band, a disco producer, and a soundtrack tie-in, all working together seamlessly. It captured exactly where popular music was heading, toward genre fluidity and away from the rigid disco versus rock patterns that had defined the late 70s. Debbie Harry became one of the defining faces of the new decade almost overnight, a signal that women fronting rock bands with total command of the room were no longer the exception on American radio. May 1980, Funky Town, Lips, Inc. Disco was supposedly dead by 1980, killed off by a backlash so intense it included a stadium event where thousands of records were literally blown up. Nobody Told Lips, Inc., a largely unknown studio project out of Minneapolis, led by producer and songwriter Steven Greenberg, they released Funky Town and turned it into one of the biggest and most enduring dance records of the entire era. The song broke through at the very end of May and rode that momentum straight into June, holding strong even as the industry insisted the genre it came from was finished. Its synthesized bass line and relentless energy made it a rare crossover, too catchy for pop radio to ignore, too dance floor built to abandon the clubs that had made disco a phenomenon in the first place. What made Funky Town fascinating in the context of 1980 was timing. It arrived right as artists were quietly rebranding disco elements into something new, more electronic, more synth-driven, less tied to the word that had suddenly become box office poison. Lips, Inc. proved the sound hadn't died. It had just started wearing a different name. Greenberg largely stepped back from the spotlight afterward, and the group never matched that height again. But Funky Town outlived the backlash entirely, becoming one of the most sampled and referenced dance tracks of the following decades. June 1980, coming up, Paul McCartney and Wings. Paul McCartney spent 1979 doing the opposite of chasing hits. He retreated to his farm in Scotland and started recording alone, layering drums, guitars, and synthesizers by himself, with no real plan for what the songs would become. One of them, a jittery, sped-up synth-pop experiment called Coming Up, would end up as the opening track on his solo album McCartney 2. The stranger twist came from how America actually heard it. Wings had performed a raw, horn-driven live version of the song at their final tour date in Glasgow back in December 1979, and Columbia Records tucked that live recording onto the single's B-side almost as an afterthought. American radio DJs preferred the live version's grit to the studio original's synthetic sheen, and it was the live cut that took over the airwaves and the charts. That live version reached #1 in late June, becoming Wings' sixth and final chart topper and, strangely, one of the only times in music history a B-side outperformed its own A-side on the Hot 100. McCartney has said he was genuinely surprised Columbia even made the switch, and that he'd assumed the polished studio version was the stronger record. It closed out Wings' run on the highest possible note, even if almost nobody realized at the time that the band would never release music together again. McCartney was already quietly becoming a solo act, one experimental home recording at a time. If you enjoy discovering the stories behind the music you grew up with, subscribe to Pop Echoes. There's a lot more music history coming. Funky Town ruled most of June, but it eventually lost the top spot to one of the strangest #1s of the entire year, a live recording nobody was even supposed to release as a single. July 1980, It's Still Rock and Roll to Me, Billy Joel.
Fuck cool pop, even if it's old junk, still rock and roll.
Billy Joel had been a respected hitmaker for years by 1980, but he had never actually topped the Billboard Hot 100. That changed with It's Still Rock and Roll to Me, a defiant, tongue-in-cheek response to critics and trend chasers who wanted him to abandon straightforward rock and roll for whatever the newest sound happened to be.
But I try to be a straight-A student. If you are, then you think too much.
The song came from Glass Houses, an album Joel intentionally built to be harder-edged and more rock-focused than his earlier piano-driven records. It took over the top spot in the second half of July, becoming his first #1, a genuine career milestone after a decade of near misses and critical respect that hadn't yet translated into chart supremacy. Its run in July mattered beyond just Joel's own career. The lyrics themselves argued against the very shifts happening across 1980s charts, the new wave sounds, the synth experiments, the disco holdovers, insisting that classic rock and roll instincts still had a place at the top. It was a hit built on an argument, and radio agreed with it.
Baby, if you just give it half a chance.
Joel would go on to become one of the most consistent hitmakers of the decade. But this was the moment the industry could no longer treat him as an also-ran. He had officially arrived at #1, on his own terms.
Can't you tell that it's out of style?
August 1980 Magic, Olivia Newton-John.
Won't make a mistake, I'll be God.
Olivia Newton-John was already a country pop crossover star before 1980, but Magic pointed her towards something more atmospheric and cinematic. Written for the film Xanadu, the song paired her airy, controlled vocal with a lush, dreamlike production that felt built for movie screens as much as car radios.
Near you, come anytime.
It spent 4 weeks at #1 in August, making it one of the summer's defining hits and giving Newton-John one of the biggest successes of her career. The Xanadu soundtrack itself became a commercial phenomenon, even as the film received mixed reviews, proof that a single song could outlive and outperform the project that spawned it.
Now, there's no other road.
Magic reflected a broader pattern. Forming across 1980, soundtracks were becoming genuine hit factories, feeding radio blockbuster singles, independent of how the films themselves performed. Newton-John, Blondie's Call Me, and other soundtrack-born hits that year showed studios and record labels how powerful that pairing could be. For Newton-John, Magic reinforced her ability to reinvent her sound without losing her audience, a skill she would lean on again just 2 years later with an even bigger and more provocative reinvention.
Bring all your dreams alive.
September 1980, Upside Down, Diana Ross.
Boy, you turn me inside out.
Diana Ross had already conquered the 60s with the Supremes and built a substantial solo career through the 70s, but by 1980, she needed a reinvention. She found it in Upside Down, produced by Chic's Nile Rodgers and Bernard Edwards, whose slinky, guitar-driven grooves had just powered some of the biggest dance records of the disco era. The pairing was initially tense.
You give to me the love that I need. I cherish.
Ross reportedly wanted a more polished, conventional pop sound, while Rodgers and Edwards pushed for something rawer and funkier. The finished product, and its full 4-week run at #1 throughout September, proved their instincts were right. It became the biggest hit of Ross's solo career.
Upside down, you turn me. You give love instinctive.
Down mattered because it showed a first-generation Motown icon successfully adapting to a new decade's sound rather than being left behind by it. Where many disco-era stars struggled to find a place on the charts after 1979's backlash, Ross thrived by working with producers who understood how to modernize funk and dance grooves into something that still felt fresh.
There's a place in my heart for you, that's the bottom line.
The Diana Ross album that housed the single became one of the best-selling records of her career, proving that reinvention, not nostalgia, was the winning formula for veteran stars trying to hold their ground in the new decade.
Upside down, you turn me. You give love instinctively.
October 1980, another one bites the dust, Queen.
Walks early down the street with the brim pulled way down low.
Few songs in 1980 traveled further from their band's comfort zone than this one. Queen bassist John Deacon wrote "Another One Bites the Dust" around a stripped-down, hypnotic bass line he had been developing on his own, inspired partly by the funk and R&B records the band had been listening to, including work by Chic.
Another one bites the dust.
The rest of Queen was reportedly skeptical at first, unsure a song this minimal and groove-driven fit their identity. Michael Jackson, of all people, is widely credited with encouraging the band to release it as a single after hearing it, insisting it would be a massive hit. He was right. It spent 3 weeks at #1 in October, becoming Queen's best-selling American single ever.
Another one gone, another one gone, another one bites the dust. Yeah.
The song's crossover appeal was staggering. It dominated pop radio, funk and R&B stations, and even found traction in dance clubs, an almost unheard-of spread for a rock band in 1980. Coming just months after the rockabilly throwback of Crazy Little Thing Called Love, it proved Queen had range that few of their peers could match. Freddie Mercury, Brian May, Roger Taylor, and John Deacon had now landed 2 very different #1s in the same year, cementing 1980 as arguably the most versatile stretch of Queen's entire career. November 1980, Lady, Kenny Rogers. Kenny Rogers was already a country pop crossover star by 1980, but Lady pushed him into an entirely different tier. Written and produced by Lionel Richie, at the time still the frontman of the Commodores, the song was Richie's first major foray into writing for another artist, and it became a defining moment for both of their careers.
Let me wait to see you.
Rogers has said Ritchie originally wrote the song with a much different arrangement in mind, only for a chance studio moment to shape it into the sparse, string-laden ballad that became a phenomenon. It spent 6 weeks at #1, tying Call Me for the longest reign of the entire year, and became one of the best-selling singles of Rogers' career. The song's dominance through most of November and into December reflected a real appetite for romantic, orchestral balladry, even as new wave and synth-pop were reshaping the rest of the charts. Lady proved that traditional pop songcraft still had enormous commercial power, especially when paired with a voice as instantly recognizable as Rogers.
In my eyes.
For Lionel Richie, Lady was a preview of the songwriting and producing power he would unleash even further as a solo artist just a few years later, once he stepped out from the Commodores entirely.
'Cause my love.
December 1980, just like Starting Over. John Lennon. Lady was still technically holding the top of the chart through most of December, but no honest account of that month can center on anything other than what actually happened to America's radio dial in its final weeks. John Lennon had just returned from a 5-year silence, his first new material since 1975, with Double Fantasy and its lead single, Just Like Starting Over, a warm, doo-wop influenced song about renewal in his marriage to Yoko Ono.
Why don't we take off?
The single was climbing steadily but unremarkably, sitting at #6, when Lennon was murdered outside his New York apartment building on December 8th. What followed was one of the most wrenching chart stories in music history. Fans overwhelmed record stores nationwide, and Lennon's catalog, new and old, sold out almost overnight.
It's like we both are falling.
Just Like Starting Over reached #1 on December 27th, closing out the year and the song's tragic, unavoidable dominance of the season. The lyrics, written as a hopeful message to Yoko about beginning a new chapter together, took on a devastating second meaning almost instantly.
Together, we have grown.
A song about second chances became the final message the public received from one of the most influential musicians of the 20th century, and it stayed at #1 for 5 weeks, carrying into the start of 1981.
Like starting over.
There was no way to close out 1980 on a lighter note, and the industry didn't try to. The year that began with Michael Jackson gliding into a new decade ended with the entire country mourning the man who had helped build the one before it. 12 songs, 12 different sounds, from smooth R&B and rockabilly to protest funk, cinematic disco, punk, Motown, rock, and unforgettable ballads. 1980 was a year when American pop music was breaking its old rules. As disco faded, veterans reinvented themselves while new stars emerged. Michael Jackson, Queen, Blondie, Diana Ross, and others helped shape the decade ahead, while John Lennon's final #1 gave the year a deeply emotional ending. These songs weren't just hits. They captured a music industry in transition and a year that quietly changed the sound of pop forever.